2 with the title Networking Beyond Schengen. We have today, as you can see, two participants. We have Philipp Dietachmair from the European Cultural Foundation, and we have Victoria Ivanova. She is a member of several international networks, of several international networks, and living and working in Ukraine amongst at Izolyatsya. Maybe first, why this topic? KumaTalks, this is the second edition of KumaTalks, and we started it basically also with the idea to have the possibility to have a platform to discuss across borders via the internet. But we, of course, don't want to focus on topics of the internet, but we are all cultural managers and working in the field of culture in real life. Thus, we are facing problems of traveling in real life. And these problems and these borders are mainly structured within Europe by the limits of Schengen. So today we want to ask, what does it mean to work within or outside this border, and what needs to be done to overcome it? First of all, I want to inform you this session will be recorded. So you already see probably the red button on the right and top. So already this session is going to be recorded. Also, all the comments in the chat will be recorded. The recording will be available afterwards on the website. So for everyone who has to leave earlier, for everyone who's missing this session or thinks this is very interesting, you can recommend it afterwards. You can just send the link and have a look at it afterwards. Very roughly, what is KumaTalks? KumaTalks is an online discussion series. So basically what you see, that is KumaTalks. We really want to promote, we want to discuss online over different topics of cultural management every 2 months. It is an initiative coming out of the Robert Bosch Cultural Management Network. Robert Bosch Foundation is running 4 programs for cultural managers to work abroad, and in the meanwhile there's a network of over 150 people throughout Europe that have been participating in this program, and out of this network's coming the initiative to realize this discussion round. To be more concrete, we have Andra Weider in the team. She is a co-moderator today. We have also Öngün Erilmaz and Radmila Joksimovic. They are supporting us in realizing this event. Then I want to introduce a little bit more to Philipp Dietachmair and Victoria Ivanova. We will first hear input of Victoria Ivanova. So she's working in the Ukraine. She was working for the cultural center Izolyatsya. And she's also a member of several international networks like the International Coalition for Arts, Human Rights and Social Justice, and for the platform of the European Union Access to Culture. Thus, she has a lot of experience working across the border of Schengen. We have also Philipp Dietachmair. He will have the second input. He is a program manager of the EU Neighbourhood Programme of the European Cultural Foundation. This is a program, they are active in capacity building, knowledge exchange, and cultural policy development. And they are active in the regions Balkans, Kaliningrad, Moldova, Turkey, Ukraine, and the countries of the Arab Mediterranean. Thus, the countries that are bordering the Schengen countries. I want now to ask, after we have roughly presented ourselves, all the chat participants, also please introduce yourself. So in the chat on the left-hand corner, please write who you are, where are you from, where do you work, and why are you interested in the topic, so we can already know with whom we are discussing today. I see some of you already started, but maybe just quickly just write, or have you all, I haven't monitored the chat, so some of you have already done this before, but maybe shortly type your country again and your organization. So also for those who entered the chat later on, they can see who is participating.
Do we start here?
Yeah, we can start. I just wanted roughly to say what is going to happen. We will have first the input of Victoria of about 15 minutes, then we have the input of Philipp, also about 15 minutes, and then afterwards we have time for 20 to 30 minutes of discussion. And I want to encourage all of you, please always post questions and comments. We have Andra, our co-moderator, so no questions will be lost, but she will also always save them and tell them to us. So please be active in the discussion. And now I'm very happy to give the floor to Victoria to hear her input to the topic.
Hi, so as you heard, I'm Victoria, and at the moment I'm working, my full-time job is at Izolatia as a strategy manager. It's an arts foundation in East Ukraine, in Donetsk. And basically, I'd like to discuss this topic of crossing Schengen from a slightly controversial point of view, not least because I like to play devil's advocate. But in a sense, I find that it's quite useful to sometimes take a cynical position in order to really understand the implications of our practice and of the trends that are taking place today. So the reason I called this presentation Overcoming 21st Century Euro Colonialism is because sometimes when we think about working across Schengen, even though it's not an expression that comes into our everyday use, but in a sense there's this association with conquering a terra nullius territory. So kind of reaching out beyond this border into the lands that are not very well known, or at least knowledge of those lands is incredibly fragmented, and seeing this as a certain assimilative practice where whatever we find there will kind of fit into what we do here. And I use these terms here, there in quite kind of freestyle manner. Please, do contradict me if you think I'm wrong. But quite generally, I think that's the perception of somebody who has worked on both sides of the Schengen border. And one of the reasons I also allude to that is because there is a tendency to use this development discourse when talking about cultural collaboration. So quite often, even from kind of colleagues from Eastern Europe or from the Balkan regions, I hear this idea that we are 20 years behind. And somehow I find, or whatever, how many years behind we may be. And I find this notion of kind of time being a measure in terms of how, let's say, how important or how valuable a certain cultural situation is, quite double-sided. So in a sense, it invites a certain notion of colonialism that I would like to discuss. So moving on. What kind of border is this Schengen border? Well, first of all, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is confusing. Confusing primarily because it is associated really with two things. I mean, the first thing is the mobility criterion. The fact that the Schengen is a certain space where people can move freely without visas, etc., and therefore they don't even think of having borders. Whereas people on the other side of Schengen border, they need to have visas. They usually have issues of, trying to get long-term residency in places outside of their home country. And obviously that impedes their life development, their life chances. It is a block to certain opportunities. And of course, it is a big block to cultural exchange. Another reason why this border is confusing is because we also associated with the European Union and projects and the cultural sphere within the European Union. However, then you get this funny situation like with the country of Moldova, where on the one hand it is part of the European Union. However, on the other hand, it is not part of the Schengen zone. And then it gets even more difficult when we move further to Moldova, a neighboring country to Romania, which is neither part of the EU nor part of the Schengen zone. And in general, it also something a zone which seems to drop into the abyss of irrelevance for many cultural or activities. So, for example, just recently discussing with a colleague from Moldova, he mentioned this example. So when, for example, music groups go on tour and they have a certain tour around the area, but their tour stops in Romania for no obvious reason apart from, some sort of mental block, perhaps, on the part of the organizers or on the part of this kind of imagined infrastructure, imagined conception that we have in our heads. Then this border is obviously constructed. And just recently, some of you were participating in this conference or in this meeting, the Trans-Europe Whole meeting, which is a network meeting that took place in Košice a few days ago. And there was a panel discussion in which I took part exactly on this topic of crossing Schengen. And being in Košice and discussing crossing Schengen and constructed borders was quite a big irony because, even in my lifetime, which is quite limited, I'm 26, so most of your lifetimes, Košice has been part of a satellite Soviet state. It has been part of independent Czechoslovakia. It has been part of independent Slovakia, which was defined as an Eastern European country. And now it is part of a European Union country, which is defined as being Central European. And more to it, it is the capital of culture for 2013. So we can see how these borders have a tendency to change, and in a sense, their change is a result of our agency, of our collaborations, of sort of grassroots initiatives which take place on the local level, but of course a certain political will to change certain situations. And this constructed notion of borders also shows the fault pits of othering places. So for example, when I was talking about Moldova, how for many, let's say, cultural projects, it sometimes drops into this abyss of irrelevance. It is really sort of a matter of othering that place as not relevant for certain cultural activity for whatever reasons. I mean, there are no really rational reasons apart from maybe funding or being unable to find suitable partners or whatever. But it's obviously something that we really need to watch out in the cultural field if we really want to claim cultural field to be sort of at the forefront of progressive and open-minded thought. Nonetheless, despite the sort of slightly daunting report, I do think that we are capable of transforming these borders. And one of these really positive examples for me is the cooperation which exists, as part, for example, of projects such as Tandem Project, but also more local, more grassroots, as I would define them, initiatives like, for example, the series of cultural exchanges that have been taking place for years now between Lublin and Lviv due to their geographical proximity. And actually, when a representative of this project was present at this talk in Košice a few days ago, one of, I think, a local activist or local cultural actress from Košice said, what a great idea. We should also do that with Uzhhorod, which is a neighboring city in Ukraine, but to Košice. So moving on. But when we talk about kind of transforming these borders or transforming how we approach them, we need to kind of refashion our thinking. And I think right now there is a tendency to think between camps, so to speak, and I suppose that's a very human thing. But it obviously follows from certain geopolitical trends and also economic trends, which divide Europe into camps. And on the one hand, we can think that it's sort of the West camp and the East camp, even though that seems like a slightly archaic lingo. But actually, it probably is the camp where things are supposedly happening and are visible, and we understand what is going on in that cultural sphere, and kind of outside the camp, where there are loads of fragmented explosions of action, cultural projects that happen and then disappear, and just generally not much understanding of what goes on there. The sort of the difficulty with the current position is that there is a tendency to then separate this kind of camp and outside the camp through this division between land of corrupt dictatorships and land of the plenty, albeit land of the plenty is currently in turmoil and distress. And to promote this kind of perception that somehow from the land of the plenty we need to stretch out the hand to the spaces that are somehow lacking in certain cultural development, and those who are within those spaces are kind of given this attitude that they require help from the outside in order to build their local cultural infrastructure. And all of that makes sense because cultural infrastructure is truly lacking. If I can talk personally about Ukraine because this is what I know best. But it is lacking in the sense of the word that we use it when we speak about sort of Western European countries with a certain institutional tradition and with a certain sort of balance of power tradition and actually checks and balances systems which were just not in place in the space that we're talking about as in east of Schengen. And obviously most of the funds, when we talk about cross-Schengen collaborations, they stem from the European Union or from foundations or from institutions which are located in the European Union. As a result, what happens is that these funding opportunities and the cultural infrastructure limitations, they tend to dictate the forms, the structure, and even the content of collaborations. And even though they're very positive developments when you have cross-Schengen collaborative practices, there are also some negative aspects which should not be missed out. And some of the negative aspects is that I've noticed that when you look at the actors who are involved in these international projects, you always see the same names. And this happens to artists, this happens to institutions, this happens to cultural workers. And what this means is that these sorts of international or cross-border corporations, they form an elite, which sometimes may be a slightly artificial elite within the country, within this, let's say, X country, which might just have to do something with access. And, you know, as we all know, access is it's also a question of privilege, and those who are privileged enough to have access to certain informations, to travel, to make links, you know, they are the ones who are going to be represented in these discourses. And for me, in this way, this kind of reminds me of old, and I'm sorry, I'm a big fan of post-colonial studies, but it reminds me of this old dialectic between the center and the periphery, where the center invested into particular developments within the peripheral zones, whilst incapable, of course, of completely putting a whole infrastructure into certain space, but just investing into certain political elites, which then grew stronger, and then started dictating the development of their cultural scenes, but not always according to the democratic principle and according to the best interest of the local communities. So if I talk about personal dreams, I have this dream of sort of so-called rhizomatic fragmentation, where these trends, collaborative trends, could be programmed or could grow out of local needs and local efforts, which means that the grassroots actors are really the ones who need to take charge. But in order to take charge, they need to have more information and they need to have resources through which to actually have access to that information. So what are the steps that are being done in this direction? I think this is something that is generally on people's minds at the moment, and sort of the darker sides of collaborative practices are not something that only I am attuned to. And I think there's a general understanding that in order to make collaborative practices really fruitful, we need to create resources which are open-ended and which don't really limit the number of actors who can have access to them. And this Košice panel discussion, it gave rise to quite a few ideas, which have been in formation for quite a while. One of those ideas is that there exists a lot of mapping exercises. You know, whenever we think about finding out about something, the first thing we think is like, let's create a directory or let's do a mapping exercise. So actually, there has been a lot of mapping done in those zones, in those dark zones, the jungles of Europe, but they have not really been pulled together yet. So one of the ideas is actually to create a resource that pulls all those mapping ideas together and to put all those actors together in a way that they can propose a platform which would be open to other inputs. This would mean that we would start forming a certain field. So this cross-Schengen collaboration field, which could start in the neighboring countries like Moldova, like Ukraine, like Belarus, but it doesn't need to be limited by these countries. I think cross-Schengen is really just a very symbolic notion of saying that we need to look beyond European Union. And as a result, what we're witnessing then is sort of formation of a network of like-minded thinkers, but who are not just preoccupied with pushing their own agendas. So really it is about providing a certain service, and as I keep on reiterating, providing a service to the grassroots people who are active within those countries and who need these other resources, other connections, collaborative possibilities in order to make greater impact to the needs that they are facing at home. That's it.
Thank you, Victoria. I think that was very interesting, and you really managed to fit a lot of new thoughts and ideas in this short talk. I want to hand over directly to Philipp Dietachmair because I think it is especially interesting now because you had, in a way, a direct approach for the funding system, and so he can now tell us his point of view. Before, I want to encourage you again, please ask your questions, please add your comments in the chat all the time. We will pay attention, and we will also ask the question that you pose already now afterwards in the discussion. Philipp, please.
Yeah, thank you. That is, I think, just exactly the right point to pick up where Victoria ended with her dream of a kind of like what we call, meanwhile, in our internal discussions, a community of practice, a pan-European community of practice. And on the other hand, I am, of course, as most of the participants know, I am, of course, also representing one of these Western European organizations funding culture in the East. So I'm, of course, one of these institutions representing that. My presentation is a little bit mixed up, so I'm trying to get to the first slide and start with that. I hope everybody can see that and that actually works. All right, so as many of you are familiar with the work of the European Cultural Foundation, I keep the introductory things very limited. As you know, we are an almost 60-year-old foundation, an independent one, financed by 2 or 3 Dutch lottery systems you will find at the end of this presentation. As most of you also know, especially those who have been or are either involved in our tandem, current cultural managers exchange, the most prominent cross-Schengen border tool we have available at the moment. You also know that we are actually, especially in the past 15 years, very, very active in this Schengen, cross-Schengen border cultural collaboration framework. I would say I quickly go through some of the approaches and the structures and also some of the project examples we are working on, and I then leave most of the time for discussing some of the concepts and the issues and the challenges, especially in terms of this westernization, colonial kind of like things Victoria brought in, because that's of course always something which is at the background of our work. So let me see that this works. My presentation is, yeah, now it's moving. But it's moving through. Hold on a second. Can I stop? Click by click.
Is it not seen? You just need to use the little arrows on the button.
Yeah. On the button. Okay, it's moving forward automatically. Okay, I'll try to work with that.
No, we don't see it. We don't see it.
You don't see it at all.
I don't know. No, but just use the arrows on the lower left corner.
That's what
We see the presentation, but it's not moving yet.
Okay. So you see the front slide?
The
Yeah,
first
okay,
slide,
second
yes.
slide. Do you see that also?
No.
Okay. Now.
You are in Adobe Connect, yeah? Maybe, let me, 1 second, I will reload it, maybe there was a problem.
Wow, everybody sees the buttons also.
No, just we see the buttons.
Okay, good. Okay, I'm stuck.
So.
Again. All right. So our entire work in the EU neighborhood. No, it doesn't work.
Unten links die Pfeile nimmst du, ne?
Ja.
Das verstehe ich jetzt auch nicht. I press the button now. Do you see, Philipp, do you see it? This moving now?
I see the front page, but it doesn't show anything. It doesn't show any of the...
Maybe we have to press play. Now. But now it's playing everything. Oh my god. I don't know what is happening. But, yeah, let's... I'm sorry everyone, it was trying when we tried it. It was working, but so, yeah. I think...
I can stop it. I can... Okay,
I was... Yeah, you can stop it.
Okay, I have to fiddle around a little bit. Okay, sorry for that. Okay, this is the second slide. Can everybody see that?
No, they can't.
There's
okay.
Some people see it, some people can't see it. I think in terms of like times, I just go on and those of you who can see the slides, slides and the rest. Otherwise, we're running out of time. So now I can't see anything again at all.
I will just upload again. Just start your talk, and I will upload it.
The basic notion I wanted to start with is that our conviction and why we always have been working, not limited to the European Union, but always have been working across the wider Europe, is that we very strongly believe that there is no vision or strategy, especially in these times of crisis, for Europe, and I mean the entire Europe, without the historical, cultural, and political and human ties we share with our EU neighbors. So this is really the notion we have based on our entire EU work. So if you want, our work is a little bit even challenging the notion that there is inside and outside notion, because culturally it's a diverse, but at the end also a more and more shared space we are working with. However, what do we need in order to kind of like create this ideal, this network Victoria was also talking about, is that we very strongly believe that what you need first is a sincere and organically growing communication and collaboration process with cultural innovators in the EU neighborhood, and only that will bring wider Europe. Yes.
Philip? Yeah. So I think because it uploaded, there was a interruption. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Now there's a presentation. Maybe you can try if it's working now. Looks good. Yeah. Maybe someone in the chat can comment. Okay, cool. Philip, sorry to interrupt you, so you can continue.
Okay, this is the slide I came. So I was just talking about the communication and collaboration process we believe is necessary to engage in developing these new joint visions for the wider Europe, so inside, outside Schengen, and joint visions meaning artistically, socially, politically, by the way, also economically. I think that's also a topic in the wider European context we are discussing. And for that, we of course need skilled cultural managers who can establish strong organizations and form powerful communities of cultural change makers, as we call them, in turbulent societies in particular. I think this is also something I already heard in Victoria's presentation. This is, I think, really the dream of like enabling local people in the countries, the outside Schengen countries, if you want, to do exactly that. I mean, we know that it's different and more turbulent circumstances. Change makers on the ground in Ukraine, in Belarus, in Moldova are operating in. I think we cannot automatically assume that this is all happening at the same level in terms of access to resources, to information, to networks. And this is exactly what we, with our programs, based on the approach, based on being approached by local change makers, local activists, people who have locally the will and the wish to do that. And for that, I mean, you know, whether we want it or not, of course, you immediately come in this colonial discussion. But we live in a world where everything is dominated also by management logic and by strategic management knowledge. And even if we want it in the West or not, and in the East, if we want it or not, it's at the end about today also about managing strong organizations. And this is why we have. This is just to repeat what was said at the beginning. The areas where we work in. So it's really the countries around the Schengen borders, so Eastern Partnership, Turkey in particular, and then punctually the countries of the Arab Mediterranean region. And now coming back to the 5 dimensions of our work, which we use in terms of, or which we find important in terms of creating these communities of change makers, which ultimately should form a network of like-minded people working on European issues together, inside and outside Schengen. So I was talking about capacity building. I think still that is a very important point, which allows change makers on the ground in the West and in the East, but particularly also in the East, to gain that access to resources and the networks and the knowledge which is necessary. Of course, we completely acknowledge that there is a disbalance in terms of access to resources when it comes to supporting really artistically innovative projects or arts innovation. This has in Eastern Europe mostly to do with the heritage of the socialist past and the fact that an independent cultural sector only exists for the past 15-20 years or so, and the funding mechanisms in place, besides the fact that they are already not having enough means available for public institutions, most of the time don't even acknowledge that there is something like an independent cultural sector. We have some positive exceptions and some alternative opportunities to tackle that problem when we think about private foundations in Turkey. I think that's more and more a phenomenon in Russia and also in Ukraine, that some individual wealthy personalities, companies, oligarchs also provide new artistically innovative centers with funding from their own private means. That is, of course, a development which, however, also doesn't come all the time with only positive developments, but also maybe replaces one externally dominated agenda with another, the personal agenda of somebody financing or a company wishing for like marketing purposes rather than like really artistic innovation. The third, probably most important point is the community development as such. This is very much in the direction of creating these powerful networks of individuals and organizations. For what reason? What is really making the change at the end? Participation in policy development, because nothing will change on the ground. These networks will not get their voices heard if they are not going there where decision where decisions are taken, and that's the political level, and this is the goal of all. And the fifth element, of course, coming back to the beginning, but also to the end in terms of participation in policy development, it starts with joining forces with like-minded people across Schengen borders all over Europe. It ends, however, also with going not only to your national decision makers, but also to European, EU, or Council of Europe decision makers who have who are framing the conditions in which this collaboration and the work on the ground takes place. And we can only do that if we form powerful communities and start talking to them. I think I'm taking a lot of time, so I'm going quickly through these 5 dimensions. So capacity building, as many of you know, in our program takes place very much in the field of arts management training for cultural entrepreneurs. I have to point out here again, following up on this East-West discussion, that our curriculum is actually predominantly designed by people who have had this experience outside Schengen, in the Balkans. Now, not all of them are outside Schengen anymore, but most of them are still outside Schengen, and developed this curriculum very much based on the standard curriculum, very much based on their own experience in post-socialist turbulent areas. So that's already, I think, a first point how to get out of this discussion of this East-West and dominating. As I mentioned before, that's an example. It's just, an illustration. But as I mentioned before, we are very much focusing on the development of cultural organizations. So that's a little bit different to the many cultural manager programs of the Bosch Foundation or others which are focusing on the individual in organizational context. So we believe very strongly really in the development of new cultural organizations, cultural NGOs, because they, from our point of view, of course, with the individuals working in them, form the backbone of this community development process and these strong communities we are talking about. This is just to repeat again, supporting arts innovation. All of you know that we have a long history of giving small-scale or mid-scale grants for local projects that encourage cultural innovators and support alternative artistic expressions, even if it's in like very difficult places like Belarus, where the fact that you are like deviating from the mainstream aesthetic norm already can bring you in quite some trouble. Community development, again, I bring an example here of the Right to the City movement from the city of Zagreb, Croatia. Some of you might also be familiar with that. That is always for us an example where a group of cultural organizations really engaged in a much larger debate on the use of public space and the basically very difficult issue around the privatization of inner city space, of development projects which are kind of like without questions asked appropriating public space. And that's of course also a topic for cultural organizations which the Zagreb movement has very successfully scaled up in terms of bringing it to other sectors, to the environmental movement which joined them ultimately, and also the many people and protesters who actually are were involved in this action. This is all happening around cultural factories. You see in the background the Bardel factory. I think I'm pretty sure they're also members of Trans-Europal. So this is maybe also a point we can I don't know if they're a member of Trans-Europal yet, but I mean they're at least close to this entire movement, which also shows that this kind of like cultural factories can also become culmination points of this sort of community development work and interacting on local level. And this is why I believe these European networks like Trans-Europal or others are then also important catalysts to link these local movements together again with the goal to scale them up for impact on European level across borders. And I have another example, the Ukraine Cultural Network, which, however, all the people you see here, this is a kind of like mix of people from all over Ukraine, from the many different cities across Ukraine, who have been involved in our arts management training initiative. We realized together with the Center for Cultural Management in Lviv. And those of you who are in tandem might recognize some of the pictures here, because we have, I think, 7 or 8 cities also involved, with participants involved in the Tandem Cultural Managers Exchange. And that is, of course, also part of building a local community across Ukraine, especially when it comes to such a big country as Ukraine. Fourth point, participation in policy development. As I said, we strongly believe that things only slowly start to change if there is a strong civic voice which demand more accountability in public art budgets, cultural planning, and policy reform. We very often see, I mean, at the example of our local partners and the many people who are involved in our programs and projects, that you can do the most marvelous things on the ground, and you might deserve all the financial support from your city you can get, and you have a full house with everything you do. But still, if nothing in general changes in the policy framework in terms of how funding is distributed and how decision makers acknowledge the role you play, then nothing will change. And that's not only the case outside of Schengen, that's the same case inside of Schengen. And I think in this current context of this huge economic crisis we have inside the European Union, which raises a lot of question about the future of the European Union, I think we are, for the first time in the wider Europe, in a kind of like similar situation that we have to ask ourselves all together, so what's going to happen now? And what are we going to do together now? And what are we going to kind of like promote in terms of new solutions of governance, of participation, of cultural practice? And I think it's the first time really, at least in this 15 years, the European Cultural Foundation has been doing that really issues in terms of questions about the future of our cultural work in the community framework, and in terms of how our democracies shall look like in the future, are similar posts outside and inside the European Union. Unfortunately, not at the same in equal level on governance level, but I feel very strongly that in civil society frameworks, our discussions are becoming similar, because the issues are similar inside and outside the EU. Just to point out, this is actually almost a quote from our director, Catherine Watson, that our conviction is always that collaboration must be two ways, recognizing the inequality of resources, because I think we also don't end anywhere if we do not acknowledge that there is a difference if you are a cultural NGO in Amsterdam and you have access to all the funding and networks and you need, compared to, I don't know, if you're trying to set up a new cultural factory in Donetsk. But the important notion is, I think, that this is always dealt with, that there is no inequality of human capacity or cultural expression, because how could there be? I mean, how could there possibly be if we understand humankind as one notion we hopefully share across the globe? Well, one of the reasons, of course, we are the European Cultural Foundation. As many of you know, we are also very active in terms of bringing the experience of on-the-ground action our project participants, program colleagues inside and out, especially outside the European Union, make and do and discuss with us, bring that to the concrete practice of cultural policy making on EU level. Because in the context of EU cultural policy making, there is now at least an increased attention of EU cultural policy makers to the Eastern Partnership countries, to to Turkey, to the Arab countries, this is still, of course, far not enough, and many more things can be done. But I think there is at least some readiness to listen to us when we come and make proposals. And one of the key aspects of our work in this field is exactly to connect communities in the independent cultural field in particular, but like-minded people from the public field as well, to create voices which are better heard on this Brussels level. Only if we are together, we shout loud, and they eventually might hear us. One of the quickly growing and more popular new tools, we only have it since last year in this field, is our Tandem Cultural Managers Exchange. I don't need to explain a lot about that. At the moment, we have 80 cultural managers from inside the European Union and from outside the European Union involved in that. We are at the moment discussing of adding another group from the Arab countries also. That will probably happen still this year. So this is a very fast-growing community, which I think very well represents our logic and our vision and our ideals, also how we would see across Schengen border cooperation, because Tandem at the end is exactly 50% participants from inside the EU, 50% participants from outside the EU. My experience is whenever they are together, of course, we have huge issues with visas and all the technicalities. The European Union logic does not only put on participants from these countries, but of course also on us as organizers. But when this community is together, and we will be all together to close up the process for Ukraine and Moldova next week in Chisinau, it's actually, I always see like a huge group of Europeans together, and whether they are inside or from outside the EU very quickly doesn't matter anymore. Of course, at the end we come to the challenges. Of course, we can by no means compare the political turbulence these cultural change makers have to work in and to go through, and also the socioeconomic volatility, just in terms of, for example, how you make your living. We can definitely not, I think it would be really not appropriate to compare that when you think about Western European living conditions, only living conditions and political conditions, and outside Schengen conditions in this field in many countries we work in. And we of course have to acknowledge that, but that's part of the learning process. I feel also as a Western European or Central European living in Western Europe, this is a learning process indeed Western Europe also has to go through, and can learn from to kind of like create this understanding how it is actually to live in and work in these circumstances. And this is what Tandem, apart from many other things, is also all about. Victoria discussed this Westernization versus local ownership topic a lot. I don't want to say a lot about that anymore. It's very much there. It's an issue, a tricky issue. We always have to keep in mind and work around with sometimes also. And on the other hand, of course, what we see a lot in our programs is also that developments are slow, change is slow and complex, and you need to push many buttons, and our colleagues on the ground and our project partners push many buttons. But of course, we would always like to have things fixed much quicker, and to have a kind of like recipe. Okay, this is what we have to do now, and then things will be fine. Unfortunately, it's not that easy, but luckily the kind of like notion that it's easy in Western Europe and everything is set there, and there needs to be a quick fix aspirations to quick fix solutions to have a situation like in the West when it comes to people working in complex situations in Eastern Europe is also disappearing, because coming back to what I said in the beginning, I think more and more people realize with this crisis also that not everything in the West is as golden as it sometimes may appear on the first sight from the outside. So we are more and more in the same boat in this respect also. And I think that's a very healthy and very good development, which allows us, cultural managers, cultural change makers from all over Europe, inside or outside Schengen, to get together and see what we all can do together for Europe, for our Europe actually, future Europe together. Just at the end, website was already shared by Andre, but for more on our activities on this address. Thank you. I'm leaving the challenges on because I think that's maybe the best one for starting our discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Philipp, very much. Thank you very much. There are first questions arising, but I want to start the discussion by asking Victoria. So, considering Philipp in a way as an answer to your input, what do you say about the things he is offering to your dream of rhizomatic fragmentation? What about what he offered or he presented?
Okay. Well, I mean, first of all, I think it will be a bit too much of a burden to force the entire development of rhizomatic fragmentation on the shoulders of European culture. I think just in terms of what has been done already. I already said that I actually mentioned the Tandem project as one of the really positive developments, sort of actually what I define as that kind of that form of development. Of course, I think ultimately, even the Tandem project or any project that is structured like that, once again, it can be successful in the first stages, but in order really to kind of bear fruit further, I think what is important is how it is followed up and actually to what further stages it develops. So, but that remains to be seen.
I think that's a very good point, because we are also at the stage. The question is really how it can be followed up. I mean, when we engage in a long-term partnership with a local partner organization, like for example in Ukraine the Center for Cultural Management, or in Moldova the Soros Foundation Moldova, or with the many tandems involved. Sometimes, and I think that's going back to one of the questions you also posed, I see it very much as a problem also that many international foundations and donors do not have an exit strategy. They never think about how ideally shall this all end when we come or when we answer requests for collaboration from our local partners. And not that we always know how it's gonna end, but our aspiration in the neighborhood program is always, and we discussed this very openly with our local partners, that once they have the feeling that the community has evolved strong enough and the organizational and human capacities they have on the ground are strong enough to move things strategically forward and to carry on, even with our financial resources and input, sometimes that is the thing which is longest needed, then we're out, and then that's it. And then local communities have to follow up. So this is really also an ideal we have, but you also know in reality, Victoria, how difficult it is sometimes in this political turbulence and socioeconomic volatility to create continuity and trust in a community, so that really things move forward. And sometimes it's jumping quickly forward and then
I think,
long months.
Ultimately, I think it's a double question, really. I mean, on the one hand, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. Can I speak?
Yes.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to respond very quickly to what you said, and that's basically that. Yeah, on the one hand, of course, this follow up. As I said, it is very important. And it's sort of what fruit will it bear. On the other hand, maybe less so important. Once again, I'm sort of contradicting myself. But I think just the mere fact of having initiated something, it has a tendency, to kind of to sort of cause certain shockwaves in society on the way of thinking about practices that will resonate one way or another. I think a much more sort of problematic point is the connection between cultural activity and further political collaborations, let's put it that way, that exist between Western European actors and Eastern European actors. So in a sense, there's a lot of there's a lot of hypocrisy. There's a lot of sort of backstabbing, a lot of double agendas, and I think it is that I'm specifically thinking about Ukraine. I think it is that sort of has a negative impact more generally on the on these follow-up things that I have in mind. But it is really a matter of the tie between the political and the cultural, which is not so easy to attend to, but which unfortunately we somehow have to attend to, because otherwise it makes most of our actions, if not superficial, I don't want to say it's superficial, but basically not as honest as they could have been.
Yes, I totally agree with that. I think it's also because as I see there was a question about the Arab Spring and how it has affected our work there, and I think the last aspect you mentioned is also something our partner organization, our colleagues in Cairo are facing very much now. That they see that there is suddenly an opening in the political context, which is this is far away from ideal and extremely exhausting and turbulent and violent and from our Western European perspective in particular. I don't know how much Ukraine reflects and sees that, or Eastern Europe, how they see this movement or these developments. But we always see, often I have the feeling Western Europe sees it as a very clear-cut positive involvement towards fantastic democracy, Western European style, and the reality of our colleagues on the ground shows that this is a far more complex and painful and frustrating, but then also again motivating process, which always involves, if you want to really make use and change something, of course you have to deal with the new institutions there. So our colleagues, yes, they go with their new proposal for the new cultural ministry, and for the new cultural administration, they go and talk to the Muslim Brotherhood, even if in terms of their cultural background and their aspirations, there might be 95% they reject in terms of what the Muslim Brotherhood wants, but there might be the 5% of creating infrastructure in localities all over the country, which is something they also want. So this is exactly what you say, that the price of having a lasting change is to go through this exercise and to try and establish a dialogue with this policymakers.
I want.
And it's always nice.
The question is also, we are always talking about Schengen and not Schengen, but actually they are different regions, and they are cannot all put to be together. Like you mentioned, Victoria, it's not like one camp, but there are so many different regions. I wanted to ask you, Philipp, what is your experience? I mean, how are the problems the same? How are they different? Does it make sense anyway to talk about Schengen and not Schengen?
Well, as I mentioned, culturally, completely not at all. Depends on which level. It's this kind of on one hand, I think it would be stupid not to acknowledge that there is a difference in terms of structures, resources, access, all these things. Access, yeah. The most important thing is probably access, because you need a visa to visit us, and we don't need a visa to visit you in most of the cases. And of course there are differences, but this is exactly what our work is about, to remove these differences. It depends very much on what we are talking about here. If we talk about restrictions for doing our work, technical preconditions, then it absolutely makes sense to talk about Schengen and non-Schengen. And if we always have to point out that actually this is hampering cultural work and reaching out to each other and shared community, and there is somatic fragmentation that this is actually hampering. This is bureaucracy hampering our work, and this is why we always, I mean, for the past 15 years already have been involved in initiatives which ask for a kind of like specific visa regulation, like we have for students, also for cultural managers. But it's more the practical term. I think in conceptual and strategic and European and political terms, it doesn't make sense to talk about Schengen and not.
I want to address.
It also has a
yes.
One more thing. I think it has a very negative notion, not only in Eastern Europe but also in Western Europe.
I want to address that chat participants, please use the opportunity to ask questions directly to Philipp and Victoria via the chat. I will repeat them because actually our time is running out. I think we add another 10 minutes because we had some technical problems. But please ask your questions or add some comments. Maybe someone of you also have his or her own experience and want to share it. One thing we were talking about also now at the European Cultural, the Trans-European Halls meeting was that what is extremely important is also to overcome this difference of center and peripheric is that the collaboration between the non-Schengen countries should be strengthened. So to strengthen, for example, an exchange between the Arab world and between the Eastern Partnership countries. What do you think? Is there something in that direction also discussed in the European Cultural Foundation?
No, absolutely. I mean, we are in our in the middle of our 2013 to 16 planning process at the moment. And when we talk about the communities we want to work with in the future, we are not making any difference between inside or outside Schengen anymore. I mean, we want to exactly we are thinking exactly of a pan-European movement of people, of organizations, of communities all over the place, which is exactly acknowledging that and okay, there might be an orientation towards a center which is called Brussels, because this is where policy decisions are taken. But in terms of collaboration and in terms of linking Arabic countries to Ukraine and things like that, this is something we always have been extremely interested in and keen on. This is what our former deputy director Odile Chenal, she always called that the exploration of new geographies. In terms of like center periphery of Europe being the old geography, and that this would be exploring new geographies.
There's a question for Victoria posed by Radmila. In her experience, there's a lack of interest to collaborate within the non-Schengen area. Everybody wants to go to the West. Is this also the same experience in your experience? The same case in your experience?
Actually, this is what I was kind of alluding to when I was speaking about this, the projected structures of collaborations that are, I'm saying they're being projected from the West, but basically it's just because where the opportunities lie, or at least the most obvious opportunities lie. And yes, generally I think that is very true, in my experience at least, that there is sort of this looking outwards complex almost, I would even put it sort of on a psychosocial level. But I think this is slowly changing, and this is slowly changing particularly towards, let's say, now I'm sort of including Poland in a non-Schengen country, even though that's a bit of a mistake, but kind of with the Ukraine is changing towards neighboring countries. And in fact, I think this is a stronger understanding of this idea that we need to build an infrastructure here, even if, let's say, we cannot have it from our government, that we need to somehow create links, create some kind of structure regionally which makes sense on a historical and political and social level, which will make us stronger in order, let's say, to fight for the sort of things that should be, in a sense, provided by the state. I think this is something a realization that came quite early on to the actors in the Balkan regions, and that I'm just actually, I have a lot of admiration that, after sort of a very difficult history, like in the early 2000s already, there were a lot of cultural actors getting together from the wider area of Yugoslavia and just saying that, we need to build some kind of infrastructure together, regardless of the two countries. I'm sorry, I might preach into convert if you like, you might be from Yugoslavia yourself. But anyhow, that we need to build this kind of base that will not be provided to our fellow government. So basically, I am really hoping, being kind of an eternal optimist before I start my cynicism, that this is the trend, or this will become a trend in Eastern Europe and perhaps even wider. I'm thinking about all the CSI countries looking to North Asia, Russia, etc.
There's a comment by Kaspar. He's from Riga, and he says he actually before participating in the tandem program, that he did not have any contact to the Ukraine. So I think that's very important that you mentioned.
Yeah, it's also part of like Latvian thing as well, that with all the developments there, that they were looking very much westwards as well. And I mean, this is it's not something specific to Latvia, but I think it's very much the case for new countries that enter the European Union to sort of get assimilated into its power structure.
So due to the advanced time, I want to ask you, Philipp and Victoria, maybe to have a last statement according to the topic, or to have a last wish or dream that you want to pronounce before we are closing this session. Or is everything said that you had in mind? Maybe Philipp, to start with you.
Yeah, I mean, the topic is Schengen, non-Schengen. I think my hope is, but I'm actually pretty optimistic. Although it's probably not the right thing to do in this in the current trends we have also in Western Europe. But I think this Schengen thing is something which I hope the latest our grandchildren already like what is this? This Schengen. What was this? That it's kind of like an absurdity which we will look back pretty soon onto like as some monster from the past. Like maybe we are looking back at some monsters from the Soviet past, or from the 50 years ago past, that we will look back at this like Schengen, non-Schengen topic pretty soon also as something from so 20th century, and now we are doing something else.
Victoria, you have to add something?
Well, first of all, I wanted to really thank Philipp for his presentation. It was really enlightening. Actually, despite the fact that I've been writing applications to the ECF, I've never seen such a neat presentation of your focuses. And the other thing is a very practical point, and that's, in the last part of my presentation, I spoke about all of these new developments, about the potential platform that may be built, etc., and kind of being tangentially involved in that, and Vic is tangentially involved in that as well. I'm just saying to all the chat participants that, guys, if you feel like this is something that you want to be involved in forming as well, or get in touch with Vic, with me, and we can give you further information on it.
Yeah, I want to stress that. Thank you, Victoria. That's a very good comment. We can. This is Andra. Maybe you can post the email address. You can also find it on the webpage. So you can just, if you are interested to get in touch with this network and develop these ideas and thoughts further, please just send me a mail, and I will get you in touch with the network. And very enlightening talk. I enjoyed it a lot, and I think it gave a lot of impulses to think further. I mean, of course, we could continue discussing for another 3 hours, I suppose, but maybe we should just use this next possibility in real life to meet and to continue discussing. I want also to thank all the participants in the chat. I think we had a quite active discussion also going on in the chat, and with a lot of diverse and also geographically diverse participants. So thank you a lot, and I hope we will also stay in contact, and you will also follow the development of KumaTalks. The documentation of this recording will be found afterwards on our website, as well as the PowerPoint presentations of this talk from Philipp and Victoria, and also the links that have been mentioned in the chat in the meanwhile. I want to announce the next chat. We already have set a date. It will be Wednesday, the 11th of July. It's again a Wednesday, and it's again at 5:30 p.m. Central European Time. The topic of the next talk is what is creativity, due to the fact that everyone is asking for creativity in funding and also in city development. So we want to develop that further. As we always have just 1 hour of talk, we want to be very specific, and we want to ask you to participate in the selection of the topic. Thus, we have prepared a decision-making tool, an online tool. Anwar will post the link now in the chat, and the link is also available now in the next 50 minutes after we finish the chat on our website. So please enter this link and make your choice, add new questions, and help us selecting the topic for the next talk. Then I also want to say as well, if you have critics, if you have ideas, if you have suggestions how to develop this format, which topics should be relevant in future, which speakers are very necessary to be invited, please send us a mail, get in touch with us. We are very open to include all your ideas, and we are happy if there's a lot of feedback. Also critics, if you say I talk too long, please just say it loudly. And so I want to close the session. Thank you again. The room will be open another 10 minutes, so you can still interact via chat, but we will turn off our microphones and discuss